My task is not easy, because I would like to speak about the evaluation of the Maastricht Treaty, of course, and the next step where we are going in the future. Maastricht Treaty is not a simple Dutch town. It has become a crossroad of the history of the European integration. It has marked several significant milestones. First of all, the end of the Cold War. It was the first reform treaty that was negotiated and adopted after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain. Second, it closed a successful chapter for those who took part in the first decades of the European integration. Third, it marked the strong desire of the Western countries to fundamentally transform and broaden the European cooperation. Did Maastricht try to provide a framework for the common European dream? Or did it miss an opportunity to unify the continent based on its long-standing civilization? Did it provide a vision, or did it create an illusion? To what extent can European institutions replace the institution of the member states? 30 years after Maastricht, these are important and also timely questions to answer, both from an academic and also from a political side. It is necessary to understand why we stand where we are right now. Moreover, these questions are all the more timely and essential if we want to unlock and understand the current political debates, and we want to imagine an intellectually sound and prosperous future for Europe. The European cooperation began as a voluntary association among the Western European countries. However, this cooperation was formed in the shadow of the Iron Curtain that kept Europe apart for long decades. The cooperation of the initial period was economic and market-focused. When we listened. In contrast with previous divisions, they wanted to achieve a European unity through economic and market integration. Therefore, in the first 3 decades, the European cooperation largely lacked ideological elements, even though the solidification of the law of the European Union was not with a judicial conflict. There had been a widespread and strong consensus. The consensus will be very important always. It was a consensus among the member states about the need to create an internal market along with the 4 freedoms, the free movement of goods, people, capital, and establish and provide services. The innovative and evolutive treaty interpretation of the European Court soon emphasized the distinct so-called sui generis nature of the European law. The 1963 Wangen Law's decision declared that European law directly applicable so that individuals, whether they are corporation or natural person, can rely directly on the European law and can enforce them in domestic courts. The 1964 Costa versus Enel judgment declared that domestic law cannot enjoy priority over European law. This was enforced in the 1970 International Handelsgesellschaft case in terms of the constitution of the member states. This judgment of the European Court brought to life of European law that many times defined itself against the law of the member states. However, the common economic goal and vision and the strong consensus again behind it provided the European institution with strong legitimacy. The results of the focus-oriented strong consensus was Les 30 Glorieuses, or the 30 glorious years of the European integration. This was a consensus of all the member states. The success made this model of cooperation attractive. That also led the Central European countries, who were still kept behind the Iron Curtain, to dream about and aspire for membership in the European integration. And the fall of the Iron Curtain seemingly brought the achievement of this objective much closer to them. As they have been freed from the grip of the Soviet communism, they wanted to be part of the success story of the European common market and 4 freedoms. For various reasons, the early 90s was a decisive moment in the world history as well as in the history of the European integration. The failure of the planned economic model gave way to the spread of the market economy and neoliberal economic theory. With the end of the Cold War, the European countries and Europe once again at least to a certain extent, regained the ability to take its destiny into its own hands. This is the first time since the end of the Second World War that Europeans got a chance to stand on their own 2 feet. The European cooperation was on the rise with many encouraging results. It seemed to have a bright future ahead. The euphoric moment of the neoliberalism and globalization, as well as the general political optimism, gave an impetus and led to the preparation of the Maastricht Treaty. Accordingly, on the major watershed moments in the historical development of the European Union was the adoption of the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. In retrospect, the Maastricht Treaty represented an important crossroad. However, this treaty reform was not easy to pass. Among others, France and Denmark immediately had their own reservation. Therefore, Maastricht has never enjoyed the same consensus as the Treaty of Rome. Nevertheless, it was a window of opportunity to see whether the European cooperation can use the historical moment and many results of the integration to become a decisive force in the coming decades, or whether this moment would be lost. With the adoption of the Maastricht Treaty, member states chose to expand the scope, the subject matter of the integration to include political cooperation with political goals. At the same time, an increasing number of areas began to be governed under shared competence of the European Union and member states. Deeper political integration was given priority over the eastward enlargement that would only occur more than a decade later in 2004 and 2007. As a consequence, the competence of the European Union has expanded and now applies in a huge number of areas beyond the original largely economic fields. The European Union has acquired its own fundamental right document, namely EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which applies inter alia in situations where member states implement EU law. This development has also reinforced the political aspects and centralizing force of the European integration. To many thinkers, the notion of the ever closer union has become equal to an ideology that envisions a more centralized political union. This is the reason that we have some reserve concerning this notion ever closer union, because we cannot know where is the border of the ever closer union. This is a very difficult expression. The Maastricht Treaty introduced the concept of the union citizenship that is originally built on the national citizenship. Later on, however, this concept has started to be used as vehicle to create the concept of European citizen, not the citizen of the member state, European member state, European citizens and European demos that are increasingly independent and isolated from its national citizenship. Even though the competencies of the European Parliament have been expanded, peoples of the member state have less and less influence on the actual decision-making process, as well as on the law formation of the European law. Beyond the centralization, the Treaty of Maastricht unleashed a process of homogenization. This homogenization process included both economic and political aspects of the European integration. As a result of the process started with the adoption of the Maastricht Treaty, the influence of the member state has been continuously decreasing. In reality, it has become questionable whether the member states remain the master of the treaties. We would like to maintain, but it's not easy. Even though the Maastricht Treaty introduced the principle of subsidiarity, it was underused and has not become a driving principle of the European integration. There are a lot of discussion about the subsidiarity, but the Court of Justice, for example, never used this principle, the subsidiarity. This has been the case even though history taught us that the strength and richness of the European civilization lies in its variety and diversity. In Europe, you can wake up in the land of Montaigne, and you can walk 10 minutes across a bridge and be in the land of Goethe. This is the cultural variety the European nations have been proud of. And this variety has been the source of the powerful liberty, and it has always given a vision to Europe. But this variety is now weakened under the weight and dramatic expansion of the European institution. The increasing efforts to centralize began to blow up the inner cohesion of the integration. By the time the eastward enlargement occurred, European integration was already heading in a direction different from the one the Central European countries once dreamed of and aspired for. The Constitutional Treaty would have been the fulfillment of the process that started in Maastricht. In a symbolic sense, this would have been a step forward to the establishment of federation. This was rejected by the French and Dutch referendum. The Lisbon Treaty was adopted as a reform treaty to replace the failed Constitutional Treaty. The past decades have revealed serious tensions and dividing lines within European cooperation. Is there a productive dialogue or destructive confrontation between the national constitutions and the treaties that enable the operation of European integration? Do we have an adequate framework that can set the potential clashes, or did we outgrow the established framework? Certain institutions of the European Union want to pull the Lisbon Treaty in the direction of the Constitutional Treaty, while the member states aim to defend their national identities and sovereign competencies. I was fortunate that I have had the chance to witness some of the interactions between the Hungarian constitution, the fundamental law, including the historical constitution traditions and the European treaties. Moreover, I have seen this unique interaction, some of the times dialogue, and some of the confrontation from different points of view. I was a member of the Hungarian Constitutional Court when the Lisbon Treaty was adopted in 2009, and the court reviewed the document based on the Constitution. We emphasized that the Lisbon Treaty did not create a superstate. Instead, member states share their competencies in the framework of the international cooperation. Somewhat anticipating the constitutional confrontation of the recent year, I attached a parallel opinion. This opinion points out that by signing the Lisbon Treaty, member states have not renounced the essence of their statehood, their sovereignty and independence, the freedom to determine the foundations of their polity and statehood. Therefore, the member states have retained their right to control the constitutional principles that are essential to maintain their statehood and constitutional identity. But it's not surprising that there are increasing number of cases in which the national constitution of one member state, as interpreted by its constitutional or Supreme Court, gives a particular answer, and the treaty or EU law may not give the same answer. This is obviously an area which is ripe for tension. It is essentially true as one gets into more constitutional sensitive topics such as asylum, national security, family, or religion. So, one of the fundamental tensions of the European cooperation stems from the conflict between the sovereignty of the member states and the theory of the absolute and unconditional primacy of EU law, along with the monopoly of the European Court to interpret EU law and the powers of the EU institutions. The European Court has not been able to relieve this tension. The European Court has barely applied the principle of subsidiarity and proportionality or the principle of conferral in its 70 years old history. Furthermore, the European Court increasingly put emphasis on the Charter of the Fundamental Law and on the Article 2 of the treaty that includes the values. The big question is whether the European Court can and willing to take into account the cultural diversity of the member states. In contrast, since the beginning, the European Court has continuously strengthened the instruments that ultimately foster centralization. So it cannot be considered as a fair and reliable arbiter between the EU and the member states. Furthermore, the European institutions, such as the European Parliament or the European Commission, want to propagate a more centralized integration and prepare a transition towards a European federal state. As a current member of the European Parliament, as well as of the AFCO committee, I can now witness this side of the coin. The long proposed transnational list, that holds the entire territory of European Union as one's constituency, as well as the establishment of the centralized European political party system, want to introduce a top-down approach in the European integration. I think that the Conference of the Future of Europe has also been organized in a top-down approach. The original idea behind the establishment of the European Commission was to be an independent, technocratic, and non-based guardian of the European legal order. However, as a reaction to the criticism the institutions of the EU suffer from democratic deficit, the Commission has started to pursue more political goals. It has been shifting and becoming more political in the name of fixing of democratic deficit. In the meantime, however, it would lose focus with regards to its traditional functions. The European Commission carries out its political role at the expense of the traditional function. The current political commission began to be much more concerned with political concern of the member states, maybe even more than with other political bodies of the European Union. Through the idealized concept of rule of law that is taken out of context, the European Commission and the European Parliament have been engaged in endless and pointless debates about member states, especially about Hungary and Poland. These debates reveal a general narrow-mindedness and stifled atmosphere that unfortunately characterize the current European politics. For various reasons, the European integration remained without alternative. Countries are increasingly interdependent due to the forces of economic globalization, telecommunication. For individual European countries to be successful on the world market, the single European market has no alternative. Only an institutionalized cooperation could make lasting peace on the continent. Shall we need a new treaty or treaty amendment? Well, it would open an opportunity for everyone to rethink their position. However, I would be more cautious treaty revisions to avoid a deepening crisis. European integration needs to consider three factors. It should be built on the principle of the subsidiarity. The centralization will be counterproductive and will lead to inefficient results. The aspiration to forge a consensus is also a key element of the European integration. Only European policies that enjoy the consensus of the member states can be successful in the long run. The lack of consensus will always result in division. The member states who do not agree will sooner or later see themselves as a loser of the integration. The third factor is the importance of cultural diversity. Beyond the European policies, this should be also embraced by the case law of the European Court, especially when the Court deals with the cases beyond the four freedom and the single market. We are also reminded of the more philosophical and underlying question. What is the ultimate purpose of the European integration? How can the European cooperation justify its own existence and raison d'être? It is destined to replace or supersede the member state by forming a larger entity. Or it is created, as its motto says, to unite in diversity. In other words, to make the member states more competitive, strong, and resilient in the age of globalization and big powers. Now here, in the treaty, we find the idea that there should be one single European people or a single European nation. It will be a major deviation from objective of the founding states. The European integration owes its existence to member states and their constitutions. They have different government arrangements and institutional settings. Each European country has its own governmental structure. They define the contours and boundaries of liberty and responsibilities in their own ways that are slightly different from each other. They are also a reflection of their unique histories, cultural identities, and struggles of the respective European nation. Ideally, a treaty and their institutional setting would reflect the ultimate purpose of the European integration in varietatis concordia. Many thanks for your attention.